Paul, and I'm your host for this podcast, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me. And we are going to dig into some questions that have been submitted over on www.paulabernathy.com. So that is our portal. That is a location where you can submit questions to me, and they'll get answered here on the air, as well as in an email response. Now, one of the ways that we wanted to do this was to allow people to be able to submit it simply through a website, get questions answered by me. They didn't go to my email. They didn't go into my spam folder. I didn't get lost. And so this platform, which was conceived by Brittany, allows people to be able to submit your questions, and it gets dropped right into a special area that I'm able to keep segregated away from the literally hundreds, if not thousands of emails that I get asking for code advice and interpretations and whatnot. So again, I wanted to create something, and getting with Brittany, and I told people we'd be launching this, something similar, and we're able to do it. It wasn't supposed to launch till July 1st, but I'm just always, you know me, I get overexcited about it. So it allows questions to be submitted so that I can answer them. And we have a great show tonight. We have 3 great questions that we're going to look at. And one of the things about these questions is when I get them, if they're code-based, I try to answer them as detailed as I can. Okay, so I can kind of give the listener the answer they're looking for. Now, I don't mention the name. I don't say who they are. I don't say anything about where they're from because, again, it really doesn't matter. The whole concept of Ask Paul was to be able to give a platform so that more people can learn by the submitted questions rather than just the person that submitted the question. Makes sense, right? Novel idea. But it is something that's we're excited about moving forward. So again, hopefully you'll subscribe and share it with others, and think about sending questions in. Just go to www.paulabernathy.com and you can submit your questions. Again, anonymously if you like, but really we want you to put your name on it so we can correspond with you, but we will never share your name or information on any of our podcasts. Okay. All right. So let me get to the first question we have here tonight on this episode. It says, Paul, I am wiring a multifamily dwelling complex with many dwelling units. There is a dedicated laundry facility on site to all dwelling unit occupants. Okay. Question. Do I need to figure in the laundry circuit for my load calculations if no laundry area exists in the dwelling units? I listened to your show on Electrician Live the other night with Jay, and you touched on this, but I was still confused. Can you help a brother out? All right. Okay. Well, great question. I did talk about it with Jay in detail. And if you haven't listened to Electrician Live, a shameless plug, Electrician Live is a industry-related show. We don't just talk code. We talk about anything. It allows me to interact with my co-host, Jake Grundberg, the Basement King, who is an active electrical contractor in the Colorado area. And it allows you to get 2 different flavors on a topic, because me being a code guy, being an electrical contractor for years, but really the last 15 to 20 years, really heavily dedicated into the code. And of course, you have the perspective of a guy who has a bunch of employees that work for him that actually is getting his hands dirty on a day in and day out basis. And so it gives you 2 different perspectives. So again, that show is great. Hopefully you listen to it on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. And if you have any topics for that show, you can send them to host, HOST, at electricianlive.com. We'd love to have topics based on what you want to listen to. All right. So let's see here. Let me address this question. So the question really is kind of something that we have to dissect, because I'm going to answer the question. So the short answer to the question to the listener is no. You do not have to have that laundry circuit, and no, you do not have to account for it in your dwelling unit load calculation. But I guess we need to go back to the beginning here and understand what all we're talking about in case you may have missed the Electrician Live episode. Of course, you can always go back and listen to them. They're all posted on electricianlive.com. Literally hundreds and hundreds of hours for you to listen. Go check it out. All right, so the first thing we want to do is I like to analyze everything. And so what we're talking about is the branch circuit that supplies the laundry area. And we know that if we're in the National Electrical Code, and of course, I'm in the 2020 edition, and I'll always be in the 2020 edition, unless you tell me a different edition in your question that, again, you submit over on paulabernathy.com. So this question is about the laundry circuit and whether or not it's required or not, and of course, ultimately, whether or not he has to consider it for a load calculation. So let's look at 210.11c, which is dealing with dwelling units, and of course, we're in 210, so that tells you what? That tells you we're dealing with branch circuits. So in 210.11c, you're going to see there's an item 1, there's an item 2, and there's an item 3, and there's an item 4. We're going to be focusing on item 2. So it'd be 210.11c2 for those that are keeping tabs of the different code sections that we're talking about. And this is titled Laundry Branch Circuits. So we need to kind of discuss this, and then we'll kind of wrap this question up at the end here. Laundry branch circuits, it says, here's what the code says. If you're following along, it says, in addition to the number of branch circuits required by other parts of this section, and what that means is, obviously, the other parts of this section, which is section 11, which there's other aspects in here that other circuits are required. Like, for example, C1, small appliance branch circuits, C3, which is the bathroom, C4, which is the garage branch circuit, provided you have a garage, of course. And so it says at least one additional 20 ampere branch circuit shall be provided to supply the laundry receptacle outlets. And you know, there's an S on there, outlets. So again, that's another question people ask. They say, well, if I have a washing machine and that's on the 20 amp, can I have other outlets in there? Yes. If they're on that, they're ancillary, they're part of the laundry circuit. You just don't run it to the washing machine and that's it. You can have another receptacle in there. Okay. And now it says, the 20 amp circuit shall be provided to supply the laundry receptacle outlets required by 210.52F. And we're going to look at that because that's all about the branch circuit. And obviously it's in section 52. So it's about receptacle outlets and their placement. And then it goes on to say at the end, it says this circuit shall have no other outlets. Okay. So what that really means is not that I'm hitting the laundry receptacle outlet that's required by 210.52F, but I might have another receptacle outlet in that room that might be for an ironing board or some other use. But what that means when it says no other outlets, the reason it says it like that, because it doesn't want you to supply lighting outlets on that circuit. Okay. So again, you got to get your mentality out of the word outlets actually meaning a device, because it doesn't. It's outlets. So you can have lighting outlets. You can have receptacle outlets, which basically is a box that you would put a receptacle device in, turns that into a receptacle outlet box. You with me? So we can't have anything else on that. All right. So this is the laundry branch circuit. Okay. Now, the other question we have to look at is, okay, well, it says the receptacle outlets that are required by 210.52F. And that's kind of what the question that was leading up here. So now we have to go and see, well, are these receptacle outlets required? And so that tells us that we need to go to look at 210.52F. Now, 210.52F says, for laundry area, it says, in dwelling units, at least one receptacle outlet shall be installed in areas designated for the installation of laundry equipment. Okay. Well, we have two exceptions here. What I will tell you right now about 210.52F, it says for installation of laundry equipment in designated areas. Now, obviously, in this question that was submitted, these individual dwelling units do not have laundry areas. Okay. So that doesn't have any laundry areas. So there you got that part out of it. But let's look at the exception and see how this plays. Exception number 1. And this is an exception to the requirement of one receptacle outlet that is being supplied by what? The laundry branch circuit in 210.11c2. So you follow with me? So exception number 1 says, okay, well, a receptacle for laundry equipment shall not be required in a dwelling unit of a multifamily building where laundry facilities are provided on the premise for use by all building occupants. Now, the submitter of this question, I literally could stop right there and say, look, this is what tells you you don't have it, because you told me in your question that there's a laundry facility on site. It is available to all the occupants. You said that, kind of what I discussed in the podcast that we did on Electrician Live. So in that case, it's not required. Now, if you're using exception 1 and the receptacle is not required based on this condition, then the branch circuit under 210.11c2 would not be required as well, because that says that you're only supplying that branch circuit to facilitate the receptacle outlets that are required by 210.52f. Well, if 210.52f doesn't require the receptacle outlet for the laundry area, designated area, or the laundry equipment, then guess what? Then there isn't one there, and thus 210.11c2 wouldn't apply. You with me? All right. And of course, we have a second exception here. It says a receptacle for laundry equipment shall not be required in other than one family dwellings. So again, anything other than a one family dwelling where laundry facilities are not to be installed or permitted. So you might have some applications where they're not going to install them, or they're not intending to install them other than a one family dwelling, of course. Or there might be an application where they're not permitted to be installed because they've designated a separate structure or separate building to handle all the laundry facility needs or whatever. If that's the case, then again, you would not need the requirements of 210.52f. And if you're not required to have that receptacle outlet, then you certainly are not required to have the 210.11c2. Okay. And of course, that also takes us and says, well, obviously, the next thing we're thinking about is the load. Well, we're doing a load calculation. You heard me talk about the load calculation. Well, that tells me again, we'd have to go to 220, which is for load calculations. You should know that. If I go to 220, then we're looking at 220.52b. Then that says the load of not less than 1,500 VA shall be installed for each 2-wire laundry branch circuit installed as covered in 210.11c2. But if you're not using 210.52f and it doesn't kick in the requirements of 210.11c2, then obviously there's no need to account for 1,500 VA for the laundry circuit under your load calculation. You with me? So those a lot of things that you have to think about. Now, 1 and 2 family dwellings, again, you saw that it's going to be required. You have to have that laundry circuit, but there are allowances where you have the dwelling units for a multifamily buildings complex that would not require you to kick in these rules. So that's 3 different rules that we kind of looked at how they intertwine with each other. So to answer the question, number 1, no, you would not have to be able to consider the laundry circuit. No, you would not have to factor in the load calculation because there is no laundry circuit present in your application. Okay. So hopefully that answers your first question. Again, you always feel like if you have a follow-up, just go over to www.paulabernathy.com and follow up. And if you have a comment on one of these shows and you want to go do a comment, make sure that you actually let us know which episode your comment is on, and it will come up in a future episode and we'll clarify. Okay, you see how this is going to work? It's really a neat concept to be able to get questions answered. Again, there's so much stuff that floats around the internet, so much stuff that floats on message boards, forums, and it's going to be great to have a location. Again, you might say, Paul, these are just your opinions, and that's right, because I'm entitled to them as you are yours, but I'm going to be able to step up and give you mine and put it on the record. You can hide in the shadows on message boards or whatever, but I am always out there. So if you don't give me any credit, at least say that I'm out there and I speak my mind, right? All right, next question. Oh, it says, Dear Paul, I see a 15 amp rated receptacles on kitchen counters all the time. Yet I know it's a 20 amp small appliance circuit. What's up with that? Okay. Great question. I have covered this topic in other episodes as well. And this has to do with the rating of the branch circuits and the rating of the receptacles and the devices that we're dealing with. So I'm going to take a little liberty here because he's talking about kitchen countertops and being a 20 amp branch circuit. So first of all, the branch circuit is one that is required, obviously, in 210.11c1. And that was requiring at least 2. Always remembering, though, if you can have more than 2. Same with the laundry. You can have more than one laundry circuit. That's just at least 1. But if you do have them, again, in a load calculation, you do have to count for them, right? You just can't just keep stacking them on and not have some kind of need to add an additional VA in your calculation, okay? 1,500 VA each circuit. You with me? All right, so he's asking, or she, I can't remember, is asking, what's up with seeing these 20 amp 15 amp receptacles on a 20 amp branch circuit? Well, I'm going to draw your attention to the allowances in 210.21b. Now, 210.21b, for those that are following along in your code book, you'll see that you have a B1, a B2, and a B3. We're going to look at B3. Now, this is a duplex receptacle. Now, keep in mind that if it was a single or simplex receptacle and an individual branch circuit was feeding it, then the rating of the branch circuit is going to dictate the minimum rating of the receptacle device. Okay, so if it's a 20 amp circuit and a single receptacle, not a duplex, just a simplex single, then the receptacle would have to be rated 20 amps as well. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about duplexes here, which is 2 receptacles, by the way. So we're going to be looking at B3. And I'm trying to answer this question. It says, B3 is dealing with receptacle ratings. It says, we're connected to a branch circuit serving 2 or more receptacles, and of course a duplex is 2, or outlets. It says, receptacle ratings shall conform to the values listed in table 210.21b3. Or, where the rating is higher than 50 amperes, which is not part of our question, it says the receptacle rating shall not be less than the branch circuit rating. So, where it's more than 50 amps, the branch circuit rating, the receptacle can't be rated less than whatever the branch circuit is once you get over 50 amps. Okay? Again, not part of what we're talking about, but you get the deal. So what does this do? This sends me to B3. Now, if you go look at B3, which is a table, and ironically, it's on the second page, you gotta kind of go over to the right a little bit. You'll see that little table there. Table 210.21b3 says receptacle ratings for various size circuits. So the question always seems to come up, and even in my Fast Tracks program, this question's asked a couple different times, and people will get one of them right and the other one wrong, but they're both the same question, just worded a little differently, because you're going to face that on exams, for example. And if we look at it here, you notice that the receptacle that we're talking about, or the branch circuit, let's do the branch circuit. It's a 20 amp branch circuit. It's one of the two, we'll say one of the 2 small appliance branch circuits that's required by 210.11c1, right? And it's being installed. And this submitter is noticing that people are using 15 amp receptacles on it. Well, if you look at this table, receptacle ratings for various size branch circuit, let's go down to the 20 amp rated circuit. You'll see it's the second one down, and you go to the right. What does it say? It allows the receptacle rating to be a 15 or a 20 amp rated receptacle. Incidentally, the internal components are identical. The only difference is the faceplate. Okay, you have the little X on the grounded terminal, but on everything else is identical inside of it. Just the faceplate's different, the design. There you go. So the receptacle rating is 15 or 20 amps, and it can be utilized on a 20 amp branch circuit. So the question is, well, if it's a 15 amp rated branch circuit, can I use a 20 amp rated device? And if you look here, no, you can't. See, it says a 15 amp rated branch circuit, and it says not over 15 amps. Okay. So that answers your question. You most certainly can use a 20 amp rated receptacle device on a 20 amp circuit, and you can use a 15 and 20 or 20 on a 20 amp rated branch circuit. But on a 15 amp rated circuit, it's got to be 15 amps. Okay. And of course, I talked to you about the individual receptacles, which is a single receptacle, not a duplex. A single, sometimes referred to as simplex. Whatever the rating of the branch circuit, the receptacle has to be at least rated the same as the branch circuit or greater. Okay. All right. So that's what we kind of covered now. But before I even go on off of that, you will notice that a 40 amp rated branch circuit allows for a 40 or a 50 amp rated receptacle. That's the one that most people get wrong on our Fast Tracks program. So it's still there. Notice that or in there, either or. Notice that the 50 amp rated branch circuit requires a 50. And of course, what did we say earlier? Anything over 50, the receptacle is going to be rated at least equal to or greater than whatever the branch circuit is, right? Okay. Great question. Hopefully I answered that question for you in good detail. Next question. Paul, I'm confused when I can use table 220.55 and section 220.55. Can I use it for standard and optional calculations? Okay. So let's answer this question. Obviously, you're studying for an exam. You're preparing. You're getting ready to take the big exam and get your license. And never give up. Keep studying. We need trained people, and we need people that really are dedicated to understanding the code, because it's not just about pulling wire. You're not just a machine, man. You got to train the brain, right? Got to train the brain. All right. So this question he's asking me now. A couple things that I'll make it real clear for you is, first thing I usually tell people when they're starting to learn these things is navigation. I ask you, where is 220.55 located in the scheme of Article 220, which is dealing with branch circuit, feeder, and service load calculations? Notice that it's under Part 3. Now, what is Part 3? Feeder and service load calculations. Okay, that's where it's at. So Part 3 is dealing, and it's what we refer to as the standard method. It gives you a process by process of how you do a calculation, and hopefully you've watched my video on optional and optional and standard calculations, because I go over in depth the different calculations and when you would use one and over the other and things like that. All right, so to answer your question, firstly, obviously it's in Part 3, so you're going to utilize 220.55 for standard method. Now, to answer this, kind of elaborate on the second part of the question, when you ask about whether or not it can be used in an optional method, and if you look at the code and you start seeing the optional methods, you're going to notice that that is under Part 4 of 220, and it's titled Optional. Now, when you go look under the optional methods, you'll notice whether or not you're doing dwelling units under 220.82. You'll notice that when you're doing the general loads under 220.82b, that you'll see that as you go down B3, you'll say that it's basically taking the nameplate rating. So you're going to take whatever's marked on the nameplate of that range and use that in your calculation. Why? Because in the optional method, you get a little bit of healthier, the first 10,000 VA at 100%, and then the remainder at 40%. So you're going to get a bit of a break here. So they just want to take the nameplate. So 220.55 is not for use in the optional method. It is for use in the standard method, which, by the way, the standard method's always going to result in a larger service than the optional method would. Most people in the field use the optional method. It's just a little easier to do the calculation because all you're doing is really rounding up nameplate values and things like that. But there you go. So you have the optional method versus the standard method. Standard uses 220.55 the table and information in the table in the section, and then the optional method has its own, and it just simply wants a nameplate. But we really don't want to stop there, because the next question that somebody will ask is, well, can I use the values in 220.55 the table? Can I use those values when I'm doing a branch circuit calculation? Because again, you all know that when you go from your panel out to your range, cooking units, cooktop, whatever, that's actually a branch circuit. That's not a feeder. So obviously we have to know, do I take the full value of the range, or can I utilize 220.55 for that calculation? Well, that's where you have to go back and look at 220.14. Now notice it's under Part 2. Part 2 is dealing with branch circuit load calcs. And if you look under Part 2, you'll notice that there's a 220.14 B. And 220.14b says electric dryers and electric cooking appliances in dwellings and household cooking appliances used in instructional programs. It's like a home ec or whatnot. It says load calculations shall be permitted as specified in 220.54 for electric dryers and in 220.55 for electric ranges and other cooking appliances. Now, that's important because that's under branch circuits. And when it sends you over here, you'll notice that when you get over into it in 220.55 and you ultimately start utilizing the table 220.55, you'll notice there's a note on there. And there's a note number 4 that talks about branch circuit loading. right? So yes, for branch circuits, you're able to use the branch circuit note 4, and you're able to apply this table to your calculations for the branch circuit. Absolutely, for ranges. All right. So that's one way to look at it. Lastly, I guess before I wrap that up, and I'm always doing these things on the fly. So I want to next, I guess I have one more thing that I want to disseminate out about that and dealing with ranges is, hold on here. Let me see. That would be, that's actually 210.19 conductors and minimum sizes. Okay, so this is the last thing I usually like to cover because I want to cover all the bases for the individual who submitted the question. You'll also noted that we determined that we can branch circuit size. We can use table 220.55 for ranges for the branch circuit. We do have note 4, but also, that's just to give us our load value. Then we're ultimately going to have to size conductors for this load, right? So 210.19, and you want to look at A3, and you don't want to lose sight of this. It reminds you, again, we're kind of building everything up here. We know that we can use a table. We know how to get the value of the load. It says household ranges and cooking appliances. And again, for those, doing their code references, 210.19A3 says branch circuits, conductors supplying household ranges, wall-mounted cooking ovens, wall-mounted ovens, counter-mounted cooking units, and other household cooking appliances shall have an ampacity. Okay, we're talking conductors here. Shall have an ampacity not less than the rating of the branch circuit, okay, and not less than the maximum load to be served. Got to do your calculation there. For ranges of 8 3/4 kW or more ratings, the minimum branch circuit rating shall be 40 amperes. So you do have a minimum of 40 amps for those that are 8 3/4 kW or greater. So kind of things to remember. And this one's all about sizing the conductors, by the way. So we have the load. So to answer this gentleman's question, and I think I already did, you use 220.55 and the table for standards. You do not use it for optionals. Remember that when you're dealing with branch circuits that you can use note 4 of table 220.55. It is applicable. And when you're sizing conductors, be aware of 210.19A3. And if the ranges, and again, it specifically says ranges, by the way, if ranges are 8 3/4 kW or more, then the minimum branch circuit rating, which is going to be the overcurrent device is going to set the rating, is the minimum branch circuit rating shall be 40 amperes. So that's a minimum. Okay. So it's kind of a lot of stuff to bring up and tie together. Hopefully you got something out of it. Hopefully you're enjoying the Ask Paul podcast. If you do, make sure you give us a thumbs up on all of the platforms and listen to us, subscribe, share with other people. We love to have you listen as this thing starts to grow. Remember, you can submit your questions over at www.paulabernathy.com. And thanks to all you that submitted the questions for this week's episode. I will catch you again next week. Stay safe. God bless.